Thousands of people took part in a funeral procession for the Iranian military advisors killed in an Israeli missile strike against Iran's embassy in the Syrian capital of Damascus on Monday. Participants carried the victims' coffins draped with the Iranian flag during a ceremony at the Holy Shrine of Hazrat Ruqayyah in Damascus on Tuesday. The mourners pledged that Israel's actions will not go unpunished. Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi offered condolences to the Iranian nation over the killings during a cabinet meeting on Tuesday. He promised that, quote, the perpetrators and supporters of this huge crime will be punished by warriors of Islam, and they will pay for their shameful act, close quote. But when, where, and how still remains to be seen, and it is the cause of much speculation around the world. Russia and China were the first to condemn the bombing as an act of terrorism. For more on The View from Russia, we go to Russia's capital, Moscow, to speak with analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, what's it look like from there?
Don, thanks for having me. The situation in Israel is with their what I think we can safely now call their genocidal offensive on Gaza. At least as far as the South African government and the preliminary ruling of the International Court of Justice is, whatever U.S. propaganda may try to whitewash it. The problem with that the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu is facing are several. One, he's deeply unpopular in Israel. His approval rating is polling in the mid-teens, and it is widely assumed that as soon as the current crisis is over, i.e., as soon as the military conflict ends, the Benjamin Netanyahu's political career is over, and he'll be gone as the prime minister. Right now, there is a unity government, which means all of the potential opposition, is part of his government at this point. And it must be said, one, that the most of the potential opposition in Israel, reflecting the opinion of the Israeli population in general, would do very little different than what Netanyahu is doing. It wouldn't really change that much. Benny Gantz is the prospective replacement, according to the current political situation, and the best that could be hoped is he would do a little bit better PR while he's ethnically cleansing the Palestinians, right? That he might be a little more cognizant of that, a little more careful in his wording and that of his ministers. That's about it. And that's largely where the Israeli population stands as well, which makes it far more difficult. It's not like Benjamin Netanyahu is gone and the problem is gone, right? It's not going to be that way. Second of all, it's very likely that right now the opposition doesn't want to take power. Who wants to own this right now? Nobody. This is a train wreck. No one wants to suddenly walk into this and then become responsible for it in a political sense. So right now they're willing to stand by Netanyahu until the minute it's over, and then the knives will come out. The second problem is one of the war goals, right? We can call this a war, and the perception of victory, defeat, so on. The Israeli government, Netanyahu, and pretty much everyone else of political status in Israel has said the goal that they must wipe Hamas out completely. Right, completely gone. That Hamas can't exist anymore. They must be extinguished, which is a pretty demanding goal. For Hamas, the goal is, the perception of winning because of the power imbalance is much different. All they have to do is survive, right? If they survive, they won. So this puts them in a very difficult situation because Israel is not winning. Right? You can't say that Hamas is winning yet; they're still alive, and the amount of degradation they've suffered is. It's certainly not insubstantial, but it's not existential at this point yet either. And the reality is because Hamas exists within, and to a not 100%, but to a very significant extent, is congruous with the population of Gaza. The only way to get rid of Hamas is to get rid of the people of Gaza. I mean, to ethnically cleanse the entirety of the city. And actually, it's pretty obvious that that is the real Israeli goal. To drive them preferably into Egypt, or if that's not possible, just into the Sinai Desert. The problem is Egypt doesn't want to open its borders. One, because it actually doesn't love Hamas itself. Sisi, assumed power in Egypt by overthrowing the Muslim Brotherhood, which is just really Hamas is seen as a Palestinian version of the Muslim Brotherhood. But also, they do have a wider concern for the Palestinian people and the geopolitics of the region. And they realize that if they were to open their borders in that type of way, that Israel would just drive all the Palestinians into Egypt and they would never, ever be allowed to come back. Right. That's so they're not going to do that either, even though the U.S. keeps trying to sweet talk and deal them into. And the Benjamin Netanyahu's continued insistence that he's going to attack Rafah in the south Gaza Strip threatens long-standing U.S. deals with Egypt to maintain Israel's security. So that's a big problem, which is why the White House is kind of buckling. At the same time, the Washington Post reports that the U.S. is secretly sending thousands of more bombs to be dropped on Gaza. So, take the protestations of the White House for what they're worth. I look at deeds, actions more than words, certainly when it comes to the U.S. government. Now, Netanyahu sees no way out of this situation because he can't wipe out Hamas and retain power. So he has no incentive to end the conflict. In fact, the way for him is to escalate out of the conflict, to drag the U.S. directly into the conflict, because that's the only way he wins and stays in power. So he suggested that he could widen the war to Hezbollah in Lebanon, but that might not necessarily draw the U.S. in. So it's Iran. The Israeli government has been since October doing everything they can to provoke Iran into an overreaction against them that would lead to a wider war that the U.S. would be compelled to enter. They have assassinated Iranian, they have hit strikes in Syria, assassinating Iranian generals. They have assassinated Iranian political and generals within Iran. They set off, a terrorist bombing was set off on the anniversary of the funeral of Qasem Soleimani, the IRGC Quds Force commander who was assassinated by Trump in 2020 with a drone strike in Baghdad. And they set off a bombing at the commemoration, the memorial of his funeral, which wiped out dozens of people. Right? I mean, it was almost certainly Israel, the Mossad, that arranged for this. Right? Maybe they didn't actually plant the bomb, but they certainly arranged for it all. So they're responsible. Also, Iranian gas pipelines have also received terrorist attacks. So all of this must be extremely frustrating because they haven't managed to provoke Iran yet. In fact, Iran and the U.S., it appears, have both gone out of their way to avoid escalating to direct conflict. In fact, Iran had Kataib Hezbollah stand down in Iraq and Syria in their attacks on U.S. bases when the U.S. was threatening to launch airstrikes into Iran. So neither of them really want it. But Israel has a lot of political power in the U.S. with IPAC and this kind of orthodoxy that I don't know, for some reason Israeli interests are often more important than U.S. interests. Yeah. So now we've got this assassination strike that targeted the Iranian consulate in Damascus, killing 7 top IRGC officials, including 2 generals, one of them Reza Zahedi, who was the commander of the Quds force for Lebanon and Syria, which means he was essentially, in many ways, Qasem Soleimani's replacement. So this is huge. And it's a violation, one, of Syria's sovereignty, although that's now become routine. It's an attack on a consulate, and it's a murder, an assassination of Iranian government officials. And of course, Israel is hoping for an overreaction out of Iran. Now, the question is, how will Iran respond? I personally think they're going to play it cool, that they don't want to get dragged into this, that they would prefer to let Israel stew in its own juices at this point. And they will probably take the attitude of revenge is a dish best served cold, and seek their revenge, their vengeance, righteous vengeance in this case, in a situation at a time and place of their choosing that may not be as explosive and public as Israel might hope, and it may not even be soon. That's my guess. Now, who knows? Because the Iranian government faces political demands from their own people for a response as well. But once again, we are on the potential precipice, however slight it is, of a wider conflict in the Middle East.
Mark, thank you so much. We'll speak with you again next week.
Thank you.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.